The metal door creaked open at 3:47 a.m., shattering the silence of the night. When the forest ranger's eyes adjusted to the darkness, his heart nearly exploded. There, less than 6 feet away, sat a silverback gorilla weighing over 400 pounds. But it wasn't the massive presence that froze every muscle in his body. It was what the gorilla cradled in his arms. A baby. Motionless, pale as death itself. The silverback didn't roar, didn't pound his chest in dominance. His bloodshot eyes, swollen from exhaustion, simply pleaded. Those enormous hands held the infant with a gentleness that shattered every scientific theory about wild animals. This father had traveled 9 miles through hostile rainforest, crossed raging rivers, fought rival males, all while carrying his dying child. But here's what scientists still can't explain. How did a completely wild gorilla know exactly where to find human help? How did he navigate through pitch-black jungle directly to the only veterinary rescue station within 50 miles? And what was he asking for in that soul-piercing stare that made a grown man's hands shake? What unfolded over the next 72 hours rewrote everything we thought we knew about animal consciousness, memory, and love. And when you discover the truth behind this impossible journey, you'll never look at another living being the same way again. My name is David Kwame, and for 17 years I've treated injured wildlife in the Virunga Mountains between Uganda and Rwanda. I've sutured lion wounds, watched elephants perform funeral rituals, seen chimpanzees rescue human toddlers lost in the jungle. Nothing shocks me anymore. March 14, 2019 started like every other night in the outpost. Rain hammering the tin roof, generator humming, me hunched over paperwork, while my colleague Thomas slept in the back room. The isolation, the darkness, the endless routine of living at the edge of civilization. Then the perimeter alarm screamed. Thomas bolted upright, grabbed his spotlight and headed for the entrance. I heard the door swing open. I heard his footsteps stop dead. And then I heard the kind of silence that only precedes something impossible. That terrible quiet before your brain has to rewrite its understanding of reality. When I reached the doorway, every logical thought evaporated. The gorilla wasn't attacking, wasn't threatening. He was sitting on our concrete steps like a patient in an emergency room, his colossal frame blocking the entire entrance. But his posture screamed exhaustion, not aggression. This wasn't the exhaustion of a tired animal. This was the bone-deep collapse of a father who'd just run out of options. And in his arms, wrapped in carefully arranged green leaves like a desperate attempt at a blanket, lay the answer to why he'd come. The infant was maybe 8 months old. Its breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps, eyes half closed, skin an unnatural grayish tone that made my veterinary training kick into overdrive. Thomas backed toward the wall, every instinct screaming danger. But I moved forward, because when I looked into that silverback's eyes, I didn't see wildness. I saw calculated desperation. The gorilla shifted his grip, tilting the baby toward me with heartbreaking deliberateness. He wasn't showing aggression. He was showing me his child, asking me to see, to understand. My knees hit the concrete floor before my brain registered the decision. My heart hammered so violently I could feel it in my throat. 10 feet separated us, 10 feet between two species, two worlds, two entirely different forms of consciousness meeting in shared terror over a dying child. I raised my hand slowly, palm out. The universal gesture of peace that transcends language, transcends evolution itself. The gorilla stared at my outstretched fingers for what felt like an eternity. Then he did something that still gives me chills 3 years later. He extended the baby toward me. Not aggressively, not with hesitation, with trust. Can you even comprehend that moment? A wild animal, hardwired by millions of years of evolution to avoid humans, voluntarily handing his infant to a member of the species that hunts his kind. Comment below. Could you have found the courage to take that child? My hands shook as I accepted the tiny body, warm but not warm enough, breathing present but failing, gums pale as paper, severe dehydration, possibly malaria, maybe parasitic infection. Without immediate intervention, this baby had 2 hours maximum. I looked up at the father and nodded, a gesture he couldn't possibly understand. But something in his massive shoulders relaxed fractionally. He'd done it. Against every instinct, every territorial boundary, every evolutionary imperative, he'd found help. But nothing prepared me for what we'd discover about how he knew to come here. The truth was buried 9 miles deep in the jungle, and it would shatter everything I thought I understood about animal intelligence. Thomas assembled our emergency kit while I installed backup cameras. The silverback remained motionless at the threshold, a 400-pound statue with eyes that tracked every movement I made near his son. I slid the IV catheter into the infant's tiny arm. The baby whimpered. Instantly, the father rose to his feet. Every muscle in that enormous body coiled into deadly potential. I didn't retreat. I lifted the IV bag high, speaking in the calmest voice I could manufacture. Medicine. This saves him, I'm helping. Ridiculous words to speak to a wild gorilla, but tone carries meaning that transcends vocabulary. He watched the clear liquid drip through the tube, watched his son's breathing begin to steady, and slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself back down. Thomas stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but treating this father as anything less than a desperate parent seeking medical care felt fundamentally wrong. I drew blood samples, administered broad-spectrum, antibiotics, antimalarials, corticosteroids, everything I could throw at unknown pathogens attacking this infant's system. While medications dripped into tiny veins, my mind raced through impossibilities. The nearest silverback territory sat 9 miles northwest, through some of the most unforgiving terrain in Central Africa. Dense rainforest where you can't see 10 feet ahead, rivers swollen with seasonal floods, and most dangerous of all, the territories of rival guerrilla groups who kill, intruding males on sight. He'd crossed all of that, in complete darkness, carrying a sick infant, no trails, no guides, no GPS, no reason to believe humans would help rather than harm. Wild gorillas avoid people. It's survival instinct encoded in their DNA through generations of poaching, habitat destruction, bushmeat trade. So what catastrophic desperation had overridden millions of years of evolutionary programming? The answer came 3 days later when we backtracked his route. What we found in that forest still haunts my dreams. Hit that like button right now, because what comes next will fundamentally alter how you understand animal consciousness. By sunrise, the infant's fever had broken, breathing normalized, color returned to his skin. When those little eyes opened fully for the first time, the father made a sound I'd never heard from a gorilla. Not a roar, not a grunt. Something that sounded impossibly like relief, like the exhale of a parent hearing their child will survive. He hadn't moved from his post in 8 hours, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, just watched. We fed the baby specialized formula. He drank eagerly, small hands, gripping the bottle with strengthening resolve. Each swallow brought him further from death's edge, and each swallow was monitored by those ancient brown eyes that somehow conveyed both exhaustion and hope. On day 3, with the infant stable and playful, I assembled a tracking team. We needed to understand the route he'd taken. More importantly, we needed to understand how he'd known where to come. Thomas, 2 experienced guides, and I followed the GPS coordinates backward into the jungle. Mile 1 revealed deep knuckle prints in mud, handprints where he'd gripped trees for balance, but it was the emotional weight in those tracks that struck me. Each footprint told a story. Each mark in the earth screamed, "My child is dying, and I don't know what to do." Mile 2 brought blood, his blood, dried on rocks where he'd slipped crossing a stream, too focused on protecting the infant to care about his own injuries. Mile 5 was where things got dark. We entered rival territory. The evidence of violence was unmistakable. Broken branches at shoulder height, crushed undergrowth from a fight, tufts of black and silver hair torn out and scattered like gruesome confetti. He'd been attacked, had fought, had won, but the blood trail suggested victory came at brutal cost. Picture this: a father, already exhausted from carrying a sick child, forced to fight other males to the death just to keep moving forward. The scope of his determination was becoming clear, but the central mystery remained unanswered. At mile 8 we found it, a clearing, scorched earth from an old campfire, crushed tin cans, plastic wrappers, and there, half concealed by vegetation, a poacher's snare trap. Disarmed. Recently. Everything suddenly crystallized. He wasn't purely wild. Humans had invaded his territory before. Poachers. And that encounter had taught him the most dangerous lesson imaginable. Some humans destroy. But somewhere in his mind, he'd made another connection. Some humans also heal. How did he distinguish between killers and healers? How did he know our station represented safety and not threat? Comment your theories below, because what we discovered next is the most shocking part of this entire story. Back at the station, I studied the silverback with completely new eyes, and that's when I noticed it, partially hidden beneath thick fur on his left shoulder, a scar. Not the random mark of a territory fight, not a leopard's claws or another gorilla's bite. This scar had structure, pattern, intention. I asked Thomas for the light sedation kit. We needed a closer look. Moving with extreme caution, I administered a mild tranquilizer while the father watched his now recovered son play. The gorilla resisted momentarily, but days of sleepless vigilance finally claimed him. His eyes drooped. His massive body settled. When I could finally examine that shoulder up close, my blood turned to ice. Surgical stitches, irregular, done under field conditions, but unmistakably human medical intervention. Someone had sutured a major wound on this animal. I sprinted to the computer, pulled up the regional wildlife rescue database, entered every detail. Male silverback, left shoulder scar, approximate. Age 15 to 20 years. The system searched, processed, and then displayed a file that stopped my heart. Gorilla rescued after leopard attack, August 2013. Emergency surgery performed, Virunga South Outpost. 3 weeks recovery. Released to wild after full healing. Virunga South. Our station. This exact building. He'd been here before. 6 years ago, bleeding out from a leopard's fangs that had torn through muscle and nearly severed his brachial artery. My predecessor's team had saved his life. They'd anesthetized him, spent 7 hours in surgery, pumped him full of antibiotics, hand-fed him for 3 weeks until he was strong enough to return to his family. And he remembered. For 6 full years, through territories claimed and lost, through seasons and storms and the endless struggle of survival, he remembered. He remembered that in a world of poachers and habitat destruction and human cruelty, there existed one place where humans healed instead of hurt. One place where pain transformed into relief, where death transformed into life. So when his infant son fell ill, when every instinct and dominance display and territorial knowledge failed, he made a decision that scientists will debate for decades. He chose trust. He chose to believe that the creatures who saved him once would save his child. If you've made it this far in this story, this channel is for you. Hit subscribe right now because we're approaching the moment that will absolutely destroy you. Emotionally, this isn't just intelligence, this is consciousness that mirrors our own. Memory, gratitude, hope, faith in the possibility of compassion across species. If that doesn't qualify as equivalent to human cognition, then we need to completely redefine what intelligence means. 7 days after that impossible midnight arrival, the infant was fully recovered, playing, eating, gripping my fingers with surprising strength. The time had come to return them both to the wild, but standard protocol, sedation and transport felt wrong. This father had walked here of his own choice. He deserved to walk home the same way. We made an unprecedented decision. We would escort them back to their territory on foot. Let the silverback lead, while we provided protection from potential threats. Dawn of departure day, I opened the recovery enclosure. The father had remained free the entire week, could have left any night, but he'd stayed. All 7 nights, sleeping outside the building, waiting for his son. I set the infant on the ground. The baby wobbled on legs, still rebuilding strength, then toddled directly toward his father. What happened next is burned into my soul forever. The silverback scooped up his child with impossible gentleness, held him to his chest, smelled his head, his hands, every inch of him, as if confirming this was real, that his son lived. Then he did something that made my vision blur. He looked directly at me and deliberately, unmistakably, bowed his head. Not submission, recognition, acknowledgement, gratitude in its purest form. We began the 9-mile trek. Thomas, myself, 2 guides, and 660 pounds of gorilla moving through morning mist. The silverback maintained 20 feet of distance, close enough to trust our protection, far enough to retain his wild dignity, instinct and gratitude walking side by side. 4 hours later, we reached the boundary of his territory, heard the long calls of his family group echoing through the canopy. He stopped, turned back one final time. I raised my hand in farewell, knowing he couldn't possibly understand human gestures, but needing him to know somehow, "You're safe. Your son is safe." The infant looked back at me with bright, curious eyes that had been glazed with approaching death just days ago, eyes now filled with the boundless energy of young life saved. Then father and son vanished into the green shadows. The forest swallowed them whole. We stood in that clearing for a long time afterward, listening to the jungle return to its rhythms, birds calling, insects humming, wind moving through a million leaves, life continuing its ancient patterns. But something fundamental had shifted in me, something in how I understood the invisible line we draw between human and animal, between us and them, between consciousness and instinct. That line, I realized, never really existed at all. 3 years have passed since that extraordinary night. The infant, now a robust juvenile, appears regularly in researcher photographs, healthy and integrated into his family group. The silverback father continues leading his troop through those same mountains, protecting his family and territories his ancestors have inhabited for millennia. Sometimes, when wind carries distant sounds from the forest, I imagine he's teaching his children the story, not with words, obviously, but with the silent, powerful wisdom that moves from generation to generation through observation and experience. The lesson that not all humans are the same, that some destroy, yes, but some, a precious few, heal, that in moments of impossible desperation, sometimes trust is the only option left, and sometimes, against all odds, that trust is rewarded. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs reminding that compassion transcends species, that intelligence isn't exclusive to humans, and that at our core, we're all just parents protecting our children on this fragile planet we share. Drop a comment about your own moment of connection with an animal. Turn on notifications for more stories that will forever change how you see the natural world around you. Until our next journey together, Tenta Novamente AH.